On the next episode of Painting and Travel, Roger and Sarah visit Skagway, Alaska. Sarah takes a trip on the White Pass and Yukon route narrow gauge railroad, while Roger uses oils to paint a scene of the historic downtown.
We decided to take a cruise to Alaska and save a few thousand miles of driving time. In 1900, this port of call became the first incorporated city in Alaska with a population of 3,000.
Glad you could join me here in Skagway, Alaska. This is the farthest we've come on Painting and Travel, and it's a beautiful location. This is a Victorian town. Later on, we're going to take a train ride, and you'll be able to come with us on that also. Roger's going to look around. He may find several different scenes to paint, perhaps a downtown location, perhaps something from the summit where we'll be going on the train later.
Skagway is a restored Gold Rush town and the headquarters of the Klondike Gold Rush National Historic Park. Now Skagway is home to 850 year-round residents who enjoy the maritime climate of cool summers and mild winters, plus a good tourist business to keep the economy going. Here's an early morning look at the business district. Skagway got its name from the first people in the area, the Tinglets. Their word, Skagwa, originally translated as the place where the north wind blows.
This is the downtown scene I've decided to paint. And I'm using a 9 by 12 inch piece of masonite covered with gesso. It's always best to paint on location, but of course it's pretty difficult to set up there with all the cameras and things. So I'm using a photograph today and my computer monitor here next to me for the reference photograph. And I'll be using oil paints today. I have titanium white, ultramarine blue, cadmium red, and cadmium yellow. That's the only three colors I'll be using, and these are, of course, primary colors. And this is quite a complex scene here, but it is one point perspective, so that simplifies it somewhat. So right about here, I have the horizon line, and 1 point perspective. I think the vanishing point would be right about in this area. And then the buildings rise up from that 1 point. Then we have buildings on the other side, and they, of course, go to that same 1 point. And since I'm standing up, I'm looking down on the horizon slightly, so these buildings would come down this way as well. So, of course, one of the main issues with painting a scene like this is the question, how do you put all this information in one small painting, all these details? And really for me the answer is I don't. I try and simplify it as best I can. And that's not always easy because it's always nice to add a lot of detail, but on a painting like this it's simply not possible. So I think this painting really will be all about simplification. And I'll try my best to do that. It was quite gray and foggy and rainy that day. So we have some beautiful gray colors within this painting. Right now I'm just trying to block in a few of these shapes so I'll establish the composition. Right here we have that beautifully shaped tower. All these lines have to go back to this vanishing point. Well, I think that will complete the layout here. So really now I just need to start blocking it in more. Now with my three colors, red, yellow, and blue, I can make a nice gray. If I want this gray cooler, I'll add more blue. If I want it warmer, I'll add more yellow or red. I think maybe I'll start by putting in some of the sky. So we'll take this very neutral gray color. It seems too dark. I'll just add more white to that. I'm putting this on rather thin. If I were to put it on thick, I would have a little more trouble going over it if I want to change the color or the value. And I'll use this same color for the street, just slightly darker and a bit cooler. So I'll just block this in quickly. There's not very much color in this, and I'm not worried about the color at all. I'm really more concerned with the values. That's the lightness or darkness. I can add a little color later, but right now, just putting in these values will really help me get this established quickly. I'll use this same little area of paint here and add some white to it. Move down here. And there's also not much color going on here because it was a sort of a rainy gray day. I want to keep jumping around on my painting here. I don't want to work on one area and stay with one area very long. I want to keep going back and forth all over the canvas or all over the board to try and get all this established. I don't want to start at any detail at this point because a lot of changes will be taking place within this, and I need to get this foundation of the painting. Just trying to lay these in as large shapes right now. There's a pretty yellow building back here. Sarah walked by that earlier. Then there's a brick building right back here. I'll put a touch of red in that. Here's that yellow one. Here we have this mountain back here. I'm going to put a little more light tones in that mountain because there's a lot of fog going over this mountain. And I'll put in some darker colors now, indicating the mountain itself. Yeah, it's rather a cool color. Still, again, very gray. You can see in this whole area of paint that I've mixed, there's very little change. Some are just a little bit cooler and some are just a little bit warmer. Okay, here we go with the mountain. I want that mountain to be very soft, sort of hidden in the fog. When it gets down here near the horizon, I can see more of the mountain clearly. Now I'm just trying to finish blocking this in so I don't have any more white left on my board. I want to get rid of all that white. And when I do that, I can more easily compare my values. Using quite a large brush to block this in, considering the size of the painting. Now as I look at this blocked in, I can see that I need to get quite a bit darker with some of these areas around in here. And I have a few people standing here, and they'll be quite dark as well. But I don't want to push those dark colors too much at the very beginning when I'm trying to block things in, because these darks will really end up as accents. You know, I may not want those to stand out a whole lot right at the beginning when I block those in. Just touching in a few of these people here on the street. Now you can see by these few dark areas how much it starts to really come together, and now I can tell really where I need to put more of my darks. If I were to have too many of these darks back in here, it would begin to look flat. So I need to bring these darks forward because I really want more contrast in this foreground than in the background. In the background, everything kind of fades away in the distance and in the fog. You know, a lot of people wandering around the town here, and I'll touch those in as we go along. Okay, here we have the boardwalk. So my vanishing point is right back here. So I'll take this boardwalk and drag it back to that vanishing point. You know, if you have good brushes, you don't need real small brushes in order to do some fine detail. This is a pretty good sized brush here, but it's a very good brush. So I can create a good point on that, even though it's a large brush. Yeah, that helps me to keep from getting too much detail in the painting that I don't need, at least at this point. I'm just putting in some of these lines with a very light touch of my brush. And all these go back to that vanishing point right there. Here we have a sign on the side. It says Red Onion Saloon. I guess it was a very famous saloon. But I'm just going to indicate that as a shape. While I have these dark colors here, I'll add a few more people walking down the street, just very simply with a touch of the brush. I'm going to flatten that sky. There's so much texture here in the street scene itself that if I were to have much texture in the sky, it would overpower and take away the importance of all the texture and things going on down here. So that's why I want to just flatten the sky. And that will also help me to sculpt around some of these areas of these buildings too. And that mountain kind of disappears behind the facade of this building. Okay, as I'm painting this, I see a major problem. This mountain makes a tangent with the top of this building as that building goes back. So I don't want that because it really makes this mountain look like it's part of this building. So what I need to do is either I need to make this mountain lower or I need to make it higher. So I think for the sake of the composition, I think it would be best to make the mountain higher. Which is easy to do. We'll just bring this up and over. And I can wipe out a little of that sky. Much easier than trying to put wet paint over wet paint. There, that's better. And with a smaller brush, I'll go back up here with the sky and take some of my sky color and soften this mountain where the clouds and fog are going over it. So I barely want that mountain to show. I want it to show enough just so people know it's a mountain. So I'll keep that very soft in there. You know, it's really tempting to use a lot more colors because I do have some bright colors here, the red, yellow, and blue, but to give this the sense that it's overcast, a bit rainy and foggy, I want to keep these colors very neutral. I'm going to place that telephone pole in here now, or a few of these telephone poles. So one goes right about there. And I'm changing this somewhat from the composition because my photograph is more of a panoramic shot, and I'm sort of compressing it here slightly. So these telephone poles are again a very neutral color, but they tend to look a little bit on the green side. And I'm going to pick up my ruler, and I'll just use the edge of my board and put my thumb and forefinger here on the edge of this board, and my brush on the edge of the ruler, and I can just slide my hand right down the side of this board, and I can have a nice straight line. It's an old sign painter's trick. Okay, we've got one pole right about here. And I think I'll have to move that figure there. That's okay. Now, if I go over this more than once, I'm really going to start blending this with the background color. But down here, it really already started to blend with the color. So I'm going to give it a light touch here and then set my brush down. Here we've got one more right in here. And this is the next pole, and it's smaller because it's in the distance. And another one way back here. And these keep going back, and as they go back, of course, they just sort of fade away, and I'll mix a lighter value because we don't want all these posts the same value. As everything goes in the distance, it gets lighter, a little more vague. Putting these things in a very simple way and not going into much detail is really beneficial. Had I gone into much detail with this man right here. Just really would have been wasted time because I need to move him over. So just placing him in there in a quick sort of way was better than putting a lot of detail in there. I'm just going to wipe this out. And of course, you'll still see some of that because it stains the board. The oils stain the board. But at least when I put the new color over that, it won't be blending with the color underneath. Okay, so I'll move him right here. Now I know where he goes. I can spend a little more time with his gesture. He's all bundled up in a jacket, big pants. Even though I wiped that out, some of that color mixed with the background and made him very chalky looking. So I'll just go over him one more time with a little heavier paint. Well, I think I'll take a break at this point and we'll take you on that train ride Sarah spoke about earlier.
I'm standing near the White Pass and Yukon Railroad Depot, and this is part of their display. They have an old steam engine here and also a huge snowblower. We'll go take an up-close look. This is the snowblower. Fortunately, we won't need it on this trip because it's summer.
Nearby is a statue designed by sculptor Chuck Buchanan. It depicts an experienced guide and a new hopeful stampeder with his heavy backpack and gold pan. Inside the depot, we bought some tickets and received information about our train trip. We'll travel 20 miles up to White Pass Summit, which lies on the U.S.-Canadian border, an elevation of 2,865 feet, and then wind our way back. The railroad brochure provided a brief history for us, which I read during the foggy parts. The White Pass and Yukon route is symbolic of triumph over challenge. The railroad was considered an impossible task, but it was literally blasted through coastal mountains in only 26 months over a century ago. Tens of thousands of men with picks and shovels and 450 tons of explosives overcame harsh climate and challenging geography to create the scenic railway of the world. The conductor came through to collect our tickets. The vision of a railway from Skagway into the Klondike goldfields was shared by 4 men who provided the leadership to push the project through to completion in 1898. But the zenith of the Klondike gold rush had passed by the time the railroad was completed. Despite conquering the significant snowfalls with a rotary snowplow and spanning Dead Horse Gulch with the tallest cantilever bridge in the world at the time, it was essential to diversify in order to survive. At this time, the clouds were lifting and we began to get some of those scenic panoramic views also mentioned in the brochure. We disappeared into Tunnel Mountain, and I thought about the workers having to blast this out and build the tracks and trestle bridge. I hate to think of the difficulties they must have worked through. Becoming a scenic railroad seems like the perfect evolution. Reminders of the past still there, but views of the present fresh with every ride. I learned that the White Pass and Yukon route evolved over the decades to encompass wharves, stage lines, paddle wheelers, hotels, aircraft, buses, pipelines, trucks, and ships to cater to emerging market conditions. All too soon it was over. We got our beautiful views, took lots of photographs, and wound up back in town, a little bit sleepy with a dose of nostalgia as we slowly returned to the station. Anytime we can add a train ride to our itinerary just makes the visit more fun and memorable. It was the best way possible to conclude our time in Skagway, Alaska.
a lot of paintings like this are really a souvenir of places we've been. They're not necessarily made for galleries. Don't really think about whether it's being made for a gallery or not, especially a small piece like this. Generally speaking, we keep these small pieces for ourselves to remember our trip. Boy, there's a lot going on here, so I just have to keep thinking to myself, keep it simple, keep it simple. Otherwise, if I don't think of it as being simple like this, it just gets to be too much to really consider and think about. I mean, this photograph just shows every single detail, everything in here. But I don't need everything in here to give the impression of where it is and what we saw. And very often, by keeping out a lot of these details, it makes for a much stronger and more interesting painting. I'm going to use a smaller brush now and start adding some of the accents here and some of the people on the street. I need a dark color for those figures because most of them are in shadow and are wearing dark clothes. And since we're at eye level, all the people in this picture will basically be at eye level as well. So there won't be any heads way up here or down here. They'll all be pretty much the same right here because all those people and so on go to that same vanishing point. So if I would have somebody really near me, that they would be taller. But all these people are about in the same area. And of course, some people are taller and shorter, so on. Trying to put these figures in just with a stroke or two. Again, I'm trying to simplify this painting so it's manageable. If I were to try and put in every little detail here, it would just really make me crazy. So a suggestion of people here and there should do it. Let's try a green color. Maybe add that to a shirt or two back here. Take that same dark color, jump over to the other side. These are all tourists. Tourists from the cruise ship. Here again, just a few strokes. Right up here in these telephone poles, we have a few flags. And that should add some touch of color to this painting. There's a blue one right in here. But I'll just indicate those with a few strokes. It's a red and white flag here, so I'll just put that white on there. Put it on quite thick. Just put those on in one stroke, and then I just try and leave them alone. Pick up some of my red. Here's another logo here. It says Red Onion Saloon. So I'm not going to try and spell out all those letters. I'll just give an indication that there's some letters there. Red Onion Saloon. I'll echo a few of those red colors down here and some signs. And there's a lot of signage here on the streets, so I'll put a few more signs out here, a blue one, a couple blue ones. In my photograph, I have a curb right here. I'll keep my vanishing point in mind. I'll come right down here. Let's just add a curb. That will give it some little extra color. Now, I am trying to keep this simple here, but I just can't have big blocky shapes throughout the whole painting. Really, right at the point where I'm adding some detail and accents. Still using a fairly large brush to do these. I could use a much smaller brush, but if this larger one works, it will help to keep this painting a little more fluid, more loose than if I were to take a really small brush. Now, there's one man over there wearing a white shirt. He really stands out. And we'll take some white. Now, this white's going to mix with the color underneath, but we'll give him a white shirt. And let's see what a touch of rim lighting on the side of this figure might look like. Well, I think to finish this painting, I'm going to put in these electrical lines and telephone lines here. So this is the scary part of the painting because this is still wet. And I'm going to put this on its side because it's much easier to make these strokes down this way than it would be for me to pull them back. So I'm taking a small brush and I'm loading my paint up on the brush here, getting a lot of paint on it, and it's fairly thin. And I'll just make a few practice strokes here, because really I only have one chance to do that. So I think that's about the right consistency. So I'll start with this pull here, and I have one shot at this. Yeah, let's see how that looks. Now I wanted to complete this in one sitting. It would probably be more practical if I were to let this background dry more. That way, if I were to make a mistake here, I could wipe it out. This will be our souvenir of downtown Skagway, Alaska. And by taking this rather complex subject and breaking it down into simpler elements, made it much more manageable.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.